Today we continue with our study of volume 48, that is, the theme is on death and mindfulness. We are still in chapter 1, in fact chapter 1 is very long, it's about 59 pages, and we're going to look at it in installments, in sections. And today is part 2 of SD 48.1. Now, in the first section there are some extra Vinaya cases which I didn't mention. If you're interested, you can read them up yourself. That is in section 1.2. I'm going to go on to section 2. Today we look at section 2, mistaken notions of rebirth and the afterlife. Now, if we ask ourselves the question, what are the basic teachings that the Buddhists should find out about? Or in some other religions they would ask, what sort of beliefs do you have? Of course, this does create some problem in Buddhism, because in Buddhism we discourage beliefs. Rather, we encourage knowing, understanding, and in that way only we believe it. The God religions would often tell their believers, their followers, believe that you may understand. But in Buddhism it's just the reverse. Understand that you may believe, and that's very important. However, having said that, there is a guideline given in the suttas, in the Majjhima and also in the Samyutta, where there is a list of teachings which Buddhists should find out about. I wouldn't say these are not tenets of belief. It's not that you must believe in these things, in these teachings. Rather, these are the basic teachings that have been given in the suttas again and again. What are these points? What are these teachings? Now here we have, is found in the key definition of right view. And we find this in a number of places. For example, in the Magga Vibhanga Sutta, S45.8, and also in the Appanaka Sutta, M60, section 6. And this is in SD 35.5. The definition of right view is this: there is what is given, what is offered, what is sacrificed. In other words, here, efficacy of wholesome action. There is good karma. There is fruit or result of good and bad action. So this is again affirmation of karma. There is this world, the next world. There's life after death. Or we can also interpret this as there are life in other worlds. It could be other parts of the universe. There are mother and father, spontaneously born beings. Here, of course, you can say this is an affirmation of the family, of parenthood. And this is what makes us human. It's continuity of humanity, if you like. And there are spontaneously born beings. In other words, there are also beings who arise on their own. Here there are two meanings. One meaning, of course, the devas, the beings of a higher plane, but more importantly, this term also refers to the non-returners. Then there are Brahmins and recluses who, living rightly and practicing rightly, proclaim the world and the next after having directly known and realized it for themselves. There is a very interesting line here. Of course, we cannot take Brahmins literally here, we can say Brahmins will refer to the priesthood. This refers to the non-Buddhist religions, if you like, whereas recluse refers to the Buddhist religions, the samanas. And apparently here, the Buddha did not claim any exclusive right that the Buddhists alone know that there are other worlds. So the line continues, living rightly and practicing rightly. In other words, it's very important that even in any religion, they should have good practice, proper practice. And in this way, through direct knowledge, they realize for themselves that there is this afterlife. There is the action of karma and so on. So in other words, as long as the religion teaches karma and rebirth, we accept that kind of approach, so that particular approach, if you like, that is Buddhistic. So we can see here quite a broad, very generous approach to religion actually. But to say it is generous also means there are limits to how we accept what is right, what is wrong. But these are the guidelines, okay, basically acceptance of that there is good and bad, that there is karma and its results, and there is this life and a future life, and the affirmation of family, and the goodness of religion. So these are the basic ideas of Buddhist tenets, the Buddhist teachings rather. So here is where, if you look carefully at this, you find karma and rebirth are mentioned here. And the problem now is that as Buddhism progressed through the centuries after the Buddha's passing, and Buddhism began to spread beyond India to Southeast Asia, beyond to China, to Tibet, to East Asia, and so on. The local religions began to modify Buddhism. In fact, whenever you see a prefix to Buddhism, in other words, there is a kind of a race or a culture prefix to the word Buddhism, you find it is a different kind of Buddhism than what the Buddha taught. It is not to say they are totally different, rather you can see they know the historical core of Buddhism, but the reality of Buddhist practice is very different. They have many other beliefs. They incorporate lots of local spirits and demons and beliefs and so on. Even in a strongly Theravada country like Sri Lanka or even Myanmar or Thailand, you find there are lots of Brahmanical beliefs too. So this is a sign of a late religion, if you like, a religion that evolved culturally. And there is so much to talk about here, how these changes occur, but we'll only focus on karma and rebirth. So, of course, karma basically has this idea that if you do something bad, the results will come sooner or later. We'll discuss this idea of karma in due course. There are some talks given on this already. But in the cultural view, there are many other ways of looking at the nature of karma, interpreting it and dealing with it and so on. But today we only focus on rebirth. So here, all Buddhists, all those people who call themselves Buddhists, somehow do believe in rebirth. Although there are modern exceptions. The Universalist Buddhists, for example, some of them opt not to believe in karma and rebirth because they claim that these two teachings are very difficult, even impossible to prove. But I think we should not be so agnostic in that sense. Even agnostic, we can philosophically discuss these two issues and approach them from the idea that they serve the purpose of explaining certain difficulties in the realities of, or in human realities, better than using the God idea, for example. So coming back to rebirth, we can ask the basic question: how do we know rebirth exists? Because here we can use a simple scientific example. We see plants growing and then flowering, fruiting, and then they have seeds. And then from the seeds, other plants grow. So you can say that's the rebirth of plants. Now, if something as lowly in a biological sense as plants reproduce themselves in this way, we can, by extension, say that or conclude that it is possible for human beings to also continue to live in that way. And it's not only biological reproduction, but we can also talk in terms of some kind of existential or some kind of consciousness, kind of rebirth, some kind of coming again, if you like. Of course, there are lots of difficulties with this kind of idea, but it actually solves more problems than have difficulties. But that's not the real issue I'm going to deal with today. It's how the various Buddhist cultures see rebirth or make use of rebirth. Now, it is important to understand rebirth that rebirth is closely related to karma. Karma is best understood as a kind of habitual act of body, speech, and mind. How we habitually act, depending on our behavior, whether our conduct is divine, in the sense that we are peaceful, we meditate, we are kind to others. So this is the idea of something divine. Okay? So if we behave like that, the human body dies, but this mind that is divine is reborn in that kind of state. But if we live like pretas, although we have a human body, but our conduct is like pretas, meaning we are addicted to various things like computer games, social networking, we are addicted to gambling, addicted to drinks, to anything for that matter. In other words, we never get satisfied with anything, especially drugs. Then, although we have a human body, our mind is that of a preta, of an addictive being. So when our human body dies, our mind will continue as a preta. And then asura is a violent person, so he becomes an asura when he dies. And an animal is someone who's not interested in learning. The life cycle is so predictable, just kind of working, making money, and getting physical satisfaction, and that's about it. So it's a very animal kind of life. And then there are those who live by very terrible violence. So here, the likelihood is they will be reborn in the hell realm and so on. So this is an easy way to understand how karma works and how rebirth follows karma. However, as I said, as Buddhism left India, or even within India, we have Tantric Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism and so on, and we can see the idea of Buddhism begin to change. In Tibet especially, we have this idea we can roughly use the term reincarnation. reincarnate. Karna meaning body. In other words, this being is reborn as a person after person after person. Of course, in the Indian, the Buddha's historical Buddha's teaching of rebirth, we can be reborn in any of the 5 or 6 planes of existences. It is as a divine realm or human realm or animal realm, preta realm, asura realm, or the hell realm. But in Tibet, according to scholars, around the 12th century, we have this some of the Buddhists there started with the Karmapa group, especially one of the great Llamas by the name of Dusum Khyentse. He had this idea of foretelling his future lives, as I'm going to become this so and so in the future, and these other signs. So with that kind of foretelling, and at the end of the 12th century, they basically started a lineage, and this became very popular, and the idea spread like wildfire, and the other Tibetan groups also used this idea and created their own lineage, so to speak. They also started predicting their own future rebirths. And of course, as we know today, the Gelugpa group became overwhelmed the whole situation, and it became, with the help of the Mongols, the supreme kind of power over all Tibet, more or less. So, of course, you have a problem here. When this is called the Cuckoo system. If you have this kind of idea where Lama A predicts that he will be reborn as B and so on, and not only that, there is also the belief that his speech and his mind can take separate rebirths too. So you find this is a new idea altogether. And the whole concept or the set of concepts is to preserve power, to transmit power, to keep power within the order, within the sect, if you like. So in other words, it is a political idea. It's a politicization of rebirth. And for many centuries it worked very well. That is until the Chinese liberated Tibet. So here we have a number of interesting problems. When China took over Tibet, of course they have to think of how to rule the Buddhists. One thing we should know here is that the people who suffered the most when the Chinese took over Tibet were clearly the Llamas, the powerful Llamas, because they were the religious royalty, very much like the Roman priests, the Roman Catholic Church priests of the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages. They were very powerful, very rich, and they did what they liked, so to speak, basically. So they were the ones who lost their power, and they were the ones who had to kind of flee Tibet. For the poor peasants and even the middle class, nothing much changed really. In fact, they felt a great burden is lifted from their lives. They're more free, and they're not obliged to be monastery slaves and so on and so forth. So you have a big issue there, socially and sociologically speaking. And of course, this idea of rebirth continued. And the Chinese came up with a rather remarkable idea. In the year 2007, they passed a decree that from September the 1st, all those who want to be reborn, or those who claim that there's going to be some kind of rebirth, they have to register that birth with one of the officers specially set up to register this kind of births. So here we have a registration of birth and death, and the Chinese came up with the registrations of rebirth. In that way, they're able to control even this notion of rebirth. And this is a brilliant coup, you might say, to counter the powers of the Llamas. So there you are. When we play with the world hits back at us. When we, as Nietzsche says, if we look into the abyss looks back at us. So we have to be very careful about being caught up with the world. Rebirth is a Dharma doctrine, and if we use it in a worldly sense, then we have to face the consequences. On another aspect of this rebirth problem is very interesting. In 1993, Bernardo Bertolucci produced a famous movie called Little Buddha, with Keanu Reeves in the lead role as the Buddha. And there are two stories. One is the story of the Buddha, and another was the story of a young incarnate Lama in Seattle. I think this story of the young incarnate Lama, the modern Cuckoo, is based on this real life of a Spanish boy who was declared to be a reincarnate Lama. But the point here is that as this Spanish teenager grew up, when he became a teenager, he just couldn't accept his role anymore. Just like any Western teenager, he rebelled, and he basically gave up the whole idea of playing this very difficult role. So here the point is very clear. The Tulku or Tibetan idea of hierarchical rebirth is a cultural one. It's not Dhamma based. It's not based on Tibetan. It's not based on Indian Buddhism. It is a cultural idea. It does not work outside of Tibetan Buddhism, so to speak. You need that culture. You need that grooming. You need the environment, and basically it's a kind of social conditioning. In fact, when one Lama was asked, what if they pick the wrong candidate? They're supposed to look for a young child as a future incarnation, as an incarnation of this Lama who passed away. So what if he chose the wrong boy? And this Lama astutely answered, well, you can bring any child. We can train this child to be an incarnate Lama. So there you are. It's not something really difficult. If you keep someone long enough in a palace and you train him enough, he'll become whatever you want him to be. And this is true of all religions. We can turn into anything we want, into a monster, into a saint. And these are all cultural aspects of religion. The Catholic Church, for example, have their own cultural definition of saints. The saints are made in Rome. They're not saints who got awakened or anything like that. So this is an aspect of religion which we don't need, which we have to re-examine and kind of see ourselves. How do we cultivate ourselves using all this teaching to become better people, rather than creating a structure and a system that can, in the end, exploit human resources, exploit other humans, and cause a lot of suffering in the world, as we have seen in much of religious history. So, the point here is that the Tulku system does not work. Not today, because we are better informed today, and even in the 1990s, the Buddhists of the US know very well, there's so much scandals with the Zen teachers, the Zen senseis, and the Tulkus in the USA. It was a very painful moment. So whenever we focus power in this way, it's going to corrupt a lot of people. It's going to confuse a lot of vulnerable people. So this kind of system has to change. You have to go back to early Buddhism as near to the Buddha as possible, so to speak. In other words, ethnic Buddhism needs careful re-examination. It's impossible to totally remove ethnic Buddhism because the countries are always there, the cultures are always there, and to a great extent, ethnic Buddhism can be healthy, can be a great contribution to human culture. But we must remember, in ethnic Buddhism, the race always comes first. Right? We have Chinese Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, we have Tibetan Buddhism, Thai Buddhism, Sinhalese Buddhism, Burmese Buddhism, and so on. So the race always comes first, and Buddhism is subservient to this race. In China, we know very well, Buddhism has been changed, has been sinicized, and you can say Chinese Buddhism even believes in a soul, a kind of an essence of life. And although there is a lip service to rebirth, the general practice, you see in Chinese Buddhism, there is just one life after death, and the person kind of remains there forever, so to speak. So there are these kind of variations which need re-examination, a lot of re-examination. Culture tends to limit. Culture tends to prevent progress in this way. So this is where a globalization of Buddhism is more healthy. And having said all this, a concept like Western Buddhism is more helpful in a sense that in the West, people are more willing to explore how Buddhism can enrich their culture. So we don't hear of something called European Buddhism, although it makes sense to speak of European Buddhism. We don't speak of Spanish Buddhism, of English Buddhism. It doesn't make sense. In a sense, it's to our advantage, because if we put race before the Dharma, you're going to put an anchor around this living being and throw into the sea of samsara. So we should not do that. So this is where we should see Buddhism, accept Buddhism as it is. This is where we have the four kinds of respects which are very important. The Garavata, respect for the Buddha, right? Buddha Garavata, respect for the Dhamma, Dhamma Garavata, respect for the Sangha, here meaning the noble ones, the saints, Sangha Garavata. Then there is respect for the training, Sikha Garavata. There is one more, Patisantara Garavata, respect for hospitality, friendliness, openness to others, to welcome them, open and welcome them with the Dharma. Now if we can do that, then we are making efforts to return to early Buddhism, which we should do. And now let us close with a short reflection. Buddhism is a living religion. In other words, if we practice what the Buddha has taught us, has preserved in the suttas, we will taste that same freedom that the Buddha has experienced, that the Arahats have liberated themselves with. And this is not difficult to do. It's not something which is so different, something to be worshipped. It is like fresh air that we need to breathe, like the space we need to be free in. So Buddhism is meant to be practiced. Reflecting in this way is wonderful good karma. By the power of such good karma, may we be blessed with the wisdom and the courage to aspire to attain at least dream winning in this life. By the same token, by the power of the three jewels, let us send out our loving kindness to all those, to our loved ones and people we care for, people who care for us. And those who have been kind and supportive of us, may they be well, may they be happy. And by the blessings of the three jewels, may all those people struggling to know the truth, seeking the Dharma, and those who have difficulties keeping the Vinaya and understanding the Dharma, may they see the true teaching in this life itself. May all beings be well and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.